On this week's episode of Master the Craft, you actually have an old student named Kira on the show. Can you kind of set up for folks who Kira is and why you were interested in having Kira on the show?
Sure. You know, when I met her, she was a student at the University of Washington and wanted to be a Disney animator. And we would talk about, because she was surprised that I knew all these Disney animators, like knew their names. So we would talk about them. And one of the people we would talk about is Glenn Keane.
Funny.
Who's done the show. Yeah. And she would talk about how much she loved Glenn Keane. And we both would sort of geek out on how great we thought he was. Then she ended up becoming an animator at Disney and working with Glenn on Tangled, where she did a bunch of Rapunzel animation on Tangled, or at least some Rapunzel animation. I'm not sure exactly how much on Tangled. And then that's actually how I met Glenn, through Kira.
Oh, funny.
Yeah.
So she literally had her dream come true. That's amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
That's so cool.
Yeah, I couldn't be happier for her. It's all she's ever wanted to do since she was a little kid. And she got to do it and work with the best people and work on cool stuff. So she was the lead animator on Judy Hopps, animation supervisor on Judy Hopps for
Zootopia.
Yeah, yeah. She's done all kinds of things. She's really good. She's really smart about what she does and how she does it. Few people work as hard at their craft. I think that's a common denominator with this show, with Masters of the Craft. The people who I have been lucky enough to know and have on the show are people who are very serious about the craft and will push themselves and find ways to get better. And Kira is no different. A lot of people are sheepish about being on the show. They think they don't have anything to say. And I think she was one of those people. Because, you know, a lot of the people are older and older than she is and older than me often. But that's not the point of this, is not that somebody's young or old or, you know, older or whatever. It's that they are practitioners of the craft. They have reached a certain level of proficiency and mastery of their craft, over their craft. And Kira is one of those people. And deserves to be on this show alongside everybody else. So I'm glad she did it.
Perfect. On this week's episode, we're going to have Kira. And if you haven't seen Zootopia, you should check out her work because she did an amazing job.
Hello, and welcome to You Are a Storyteller, Masters of the Craft, a conversational series hosted by author and filmmaker Brian McDonald. In this episode, Brian is joined by Kira Lehtomaki, animator at Walt Disney Animation Studios, and the animation supervisor behind Judy Hopps, the beloved protagonist in the 2016 film Zootopia. In this episode, Kira shares why fear and constraints drive her to do her best work, and why sometimes less is more in telling great stories.
Hey.
Hi.
I'm so glad you're doing this.
I'm so honored to do this. Like I will say my biggest fear is that you're going to have to change the title of your podcast for me, because this is you're the master, I'm the apprentice, and this is a big honor.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, here's the thing. Now, I've known you. I was trying to figure out how long I've known you. Do you have any idea how many years I've known you?
I took your class in 2003.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Do that math.
Okay. So, yeah, a while.
18 years.
18 years. Wow. That's crazy.
I know.
Wow.
Like our knowing each other is like a real adult.
Yeah. So yeah, when I first met you, you were going to the University of Washington, and you wanted to be an animator.
Yep.
Now you're a little like me in that we both knew what we wanted to do from very young ages. How old were you?
Well, I really think I was 3.
Okay.
I don't know that I knew, well, I certainly didn't know what an animator was, but I saw Sleeping Beauty when I was 3. Pinocchio was actually the first movie I saw in the theaters. And I
That's
think
it's a good one to be the first one. It's good.
Yeah. And I think I had seen, they did a lot of, especially on the VHSs back then and on like Wonderful World of Disney, they show a lot of behind the scenes. And so I think I had seen people making these movies and I thought, I want to do that. And you always hear the term animator. And I was like, I want to be an animator. But I remember praying, thinking like, I hope I don't have to decide what the character looks like. And I hope I don't have to figure out like all these other things, because I really wanted to do like the acting. And so it worked out that that's indeed the job of the animator. So
yeah, that's cool. So you ended up exactly where you wanted to be.
Yeah.
Exactly at the place and exactly at the job.
I know.
That doesn't happen for that many people. I couldn't be happier for you and prouder of you, because I remember, when you were a person on the outside wanting to get in. Actually, after you left and other students would come through that program, you became kind of a legend, because you became sort of a North Star. Like, I know. The funny thing is like, well, I've seen students go on to things. I know you can do it. And they just thought it was this impossible thing. But you became this thing that made it possible. So that's really, that you didn't mean to do that, but that's what you did.
Oh, I mean, that is so nice. But really, it's like, I had so many people helping me. I don't feel like there was never a time where it's like, I've achieved this thing. Like I achieved my dream. Like you certainly were such a huge part of me even being able to, I use the things that you taught me every single day in what I do. And I feel like that is, if anybody thinks I have good work or something insightful, it is in large part to the things that I learned from you. So it's like, I feel like I've just stolen these nuggets and this knowledge along the way. And I am reaping the benefits of being able to like live out my dream and really do my dream job. So thank you.
Wow. That means a lot. Here's what I think. When you are a teacher, sometimes students come through and you think, how lucky am I to have this student? And so you're one of those people, you're at the top of that list. And the other thing is, you think they would have learned this anyway. They would have learned it from someone. They would have learned it somewhere, because you had a hunger to learn it. That's part of what a teacher responds to is, the enthusiasm and the passion. You would have found it. I would just happen to be standing in the right place when, you know what I mean? To be the person, but I think you were learned it someplace. That's what I think.
Well, thank you. But God was very good in giving me you as a teacher, because that was everything that I needed. So,
wow. So, I want to go back to your childhood, but I want to ask you, what is it that I taught you? It may not be specific. It may be internalized now, but do you have any idea what it is I taught you that you use, or how do you use that?
Yeah, I think, well, even though I'm not in the story department, I'm not any of these things. I think you broke down story in a way that I thought it was just this nebulous thing that I would never be able to understand, because only like super creative people do it. And you really taught that it's all about observation. And you taught, like, you were teaching me how to see things. And largely that is the job of an animator, is to be observant and to really pay attention to the things that you are observing. And so there's that, but then there's also the golden theme of we are all the same. And I apply that in a way where, and I hope I'm applying it in a way that you approve of, but it's when I approach a scene where a character, has to do something, a lot of times us animators, we film reference of ourselves acting it out. Not because I'm not great in front of the camera. That's why I became an animator. I like acting, but I get to do it behind the scenes. I'm like the shy actor who doesn't want to be on camera. But I can't put on this character and try to be something that I'm not. But I feel like that's okay. because I find that sort of autobiographical part of what the character is saying, and I do it as if it's real for me. Mm-hmm. And then I look at that, I make observations, and I translate that onto the character, hopefully in poses and facial expressions that are on model and correct for that character, so that you're not seeing me, but hopefully that the truth of the experience, it's real for me. And so I'm betting on, if it's real for me, it'll be real for somebody else.
Well, you do that well. You know, it's funny. I can't see it, but Glenn Keane told me that when he watches the stuff you did on Rapunzel, he can see you.
It's funny. My parents watched the movie in the theater, and my mom, my mom is the best animation critic ever. If any students out there need feedback on their scenes, show it to my mom. She knows what she's talking about. Wow. But she watched the movie, and afterwards she asked me, she was like, "Did you animate this scene?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And she could tell because she saw me in it. And that was really like, oh, that's a little scary that they could see me, and recognize me through that. It was an interesting thing because, in being such a fan of the hand-drawn films, you watch these old movies, you're like, oh, that's an Ollie Johnston scene, or that's a, Frank Thomas one, or Milt Kahl, or, all of these guys. And, there was always, I feel like there is a little bit of this perception of when it goes into CG, you lose that because there is this, this disconnect from it's not hand drawn anymore. So somehow the hand of the animator is removed from it. But when I watch the movies that I get to work on at Disney, it's literally like a scrapbook of seeing all of my friends and coworkers performing their scenes. I see them in the work. Sure. And hopefully it's not at a point where it's distracting, where it's like, oh, that's Tony, and that's not, right. Rapunzel, or, it's not taking you out of the movie because it's so disjoint from who that character should be. But I see, I recognize the people in their work. And I remember one other time at work, I had worked on Wreck-It Ralph, and the villain of Wreck-It Ralph is King Candy. And he's kind of an Ed Wynn, real cartoony character. And I animated this scene, and a friend of mine is like, that looks like you. And I was like, thank you.
Okay, I wanted to know how you were using that stuff, and I didn't want to forget to bring it up. So now I want to go back. Let's go back in time now. So you're a little kid, and you want to be an animator. Oh, you don't know exactly. You do, or whatever you think this is. I had sort of a similar thing where I wanted to make movies, but I didn't make a distinction between live action and animated, and being the special effects person versus being the writer versus being the director. It was all just making movies to me. I didn't, once I figured out who the director was, that seemed like a good job to me. Not for ego reasons. A lot of people want to be the director because they want to be in charge. And that wasn't my thinking. I wanted to do that because I thought it was the best use of my skills. I thought, no, that's what I can do. And I also, Ron Howard said this about directing, you get to hang out with everybody. And that part appealed to me too. Getting to hang out with everybody. But anyway, so you were a kid, you didn't know what you wanted to do exactly. How did you, what were you driven? I remember being a very single-minded kid about what I wanted to do. It's all I read about practically. It's all I thought about. I watched movies in a very specific way. What were you doing?
Yeah, it's funny. So I think I decided when I was 3, but I have a worksheet from kindergarten where, they ask you that question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wrote a drawer for Disney because I didn't know the word animator at that point. Yeah. And so it's as long as I can remember, that has always, without question, without hesitation, that has been my goal. And so I drew a lot as a kid. Like if you go back through all of the drawings that my mom has saved, they're always Mickey Mouse, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Little Mermaid, like I was singularly, well, there's cats in there too, because I love cats, but it was sort of those two categories. And
Sure.
Then I remember.
I want to stop you real quick. You know what I did is I learned how to do Walt Disney's signature because I thought, well, that's on all the drawings. I guess I have to know how to do that if I'm going to do the job. So I learned how to do.
That's cute.
Yeah. So anyway.
As long as you don't use your power for evil and like forge his signature.
Yeah, no, I never thought about that, but no. Yeah. No, good.
Walt Disney signed books are worth a lot of money. So
I bet they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was also before the internet was in my home or even available. And so I remember, I think I got a book on the art of animation by Bob Thomas, which is actually a book that was published back in the 50s for like the making of Sleeping Beauty. And then he updated it over the years. And I had I was so spoiled. I got to go to Disney World on a spring break trip with my parents. Mm-hmm. And they have that, they used to have the Florida studio actually in the park. Right, It's Hollywood Studios now, but it was MGM then. And they'd have, big glass walls and you could see into the studios and you could see these people making the movies. And then they had a little video where Robin Williams walked you through the process of how animated movies are made. And then every good tour, it ends in the gift shop. And in the gift shop, I got this art of animation book. And I remember it had little profiles on some of the people that were making these things, Glenn Keane, Andreas Deja, and so I was, reading a little bit. This was the first time I was exposed to the names behind the magic for me. Yeah. And I was sort of reading about the process, but also they had nice images, still images from the movies. And so I would try to copy them. I'd be like, okay, I'm going to look at this picture and I'm going to draw this and I'm going to try to get the proportions the same. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first drawing that I did where I was like, I think that looks like her was Belle. I had drawn Belle. Uh-huh. It looks terrible now that I look back at it. But I was like, I think I can do this. I think I can be an animator.
But that was a good thing. That was a good delusion, right? Because it was, right? Yeah. Because it propelled you forward, right?
Yeah. So I drew a lot of kind of copying. And then I sort of graduated and then I started trying to copy real people from photographs and drawing them. And, but the other thing that I got in that, when I went on the tour was I think I asked somebody that worked in the gift shop there about, how you get to be an animator. And they had a photocopied portfolio tips packet. Wow. That they gave me. And I wish I had it here. It's actually still at my parents' house in Seattle, but in there they had a lot of life drawings and zoo drawings and things like that. And I mean, I was still very young at that point. So it embarrassingly took me a long time before I connected those two. And I was like, oh, I should be doing that. Huh. I was trying to just get as much information as I could and really try to copy the drawing. So it's well, if I can show them that I can draw Belle, maybe they'll let me work there.
Sure. It's funny. I used to go to the zoo because I was a big Ray Harryhausen, Ray Harryhausen, Willis O'Brien fan. And so I'm I would read something and they used to, they studied gorillas to see how they moved. I'm I got to go to the zoo. So I would go and watch animals move. I thought maybe I would do stop motion. I did a little bit in my time, but not a lot of it. But I thought that's what you did. And so I did the same kind of thing where it's oh, I better be doing that. So I would go to the zoo all the time as a kid.
Yeah.
To just observe animals and their behavior.
Yeah. Another big moment for me was my very first piece of animation that I ever did was a flounder from The Little Mermaid because he was a little simpler than Ariel. And I did a side profile drawing of him. And I thought, I'm going to draw a lot of these and I'm going to have him opening his mouth. And I stapled the pictures together and I made my first flip book.
Wow. Yeah, sure.
So, but I think I was learning those things just from those behind the scenes. Like when the VHSs came out, they always had like a little preview of like what they were working on next. And they showed people flipping drawings and, all of that, those glimpses behind the magic really helped me figure out like, oh, this is a job. I could maybe do this. So
and you were later than the Wonderful World of Disney, right? You came.
Yeah. They still had it. But I think they would show like, The Parent Trap on Sunday nights or something.
Right. Yeah. But, when I was a kid, they showed a lot of behind the scenes stuff. They showed a lot of they would show the multiplane camera from Bambi stuff. They would show you all that stuff, even though it was old, even at that time. It was like something shot in the 40s. But I didn't know. I was a kid. It seemed like it was new to me. Right. Yep. I remember that almost hunger for any behind the scenes. Anytime I saw behind the scenes, I was there. There used to be a show called That's Hollywood in the 70s. There was a show called That's Hollywood, and it was a 20th Century Fox show. I didn't realize that at the time, but now I go, oh, all those movies were 20th Century Fox movies. But they would show behind the scenes stuff and how something was made, and I never missed an episode of That's Hollywood. I didn't see it on YouTube, but I never.
Yeah, it probably is.
Yeah, it might be. But I never missed an episode.
I can't believe all the stuff I missed that I see on YouTube now, and I'm like, how come I didn't know about this when I was 10?
Yeah, but somehow you got there anyway. You didn't need it apparently. So, so you were doing that stuff. You realized, oh, I have to, I can make flip books. I can do my own animation. And then what were the steps you took?
What were the steps? Well, that continued for a long time. I remember being in high school and taking, the art class and always telling everybody, even in English class, like we'd have to do like speeches or reports about, we'd have to research a career and then give a speech. And I would do drawings of like a montage of Disney characters. And then I would give a speech about working at Disney and researching, what you'd have to do. So it was like my every assignment, every project, if I could focus it in that direction, even if the subject was not related to it, I would try to focus it that way.
I did that.
Yeah. And I had great teachers all through school. I remember one art teacher who was really kind, but he was sort of warning me of like, this, it's a real tough industry, So, I think he was just trying to prepare me for not being eternally crushed if that weren't necessarily a reality. But I continued to just sort of believe that was what I was meant to do and that it would happen.
Do you have a feeling about that kind of warning one way or the other now as an adult looking back? Or do you just think, well, it was kind-hearted? Do you think it was wise? Do you think it was ill-advised? Do you have a feeling about that now?
I think his intention was absolutely kind-hearted. I think it was also very realistic because I think one of the things that I see sometimes is, I think my job is pretty cool. Like I get to work on like the things that I like to watch just for in my free time, kind of thing. Yeah. And I see a lot of fans. Like I have the great privilege of, working at like the D23 Expo, which is like Disney's Comic-Con kind of thing. And you meet a lot of like fans, and I'm absolutely one of them. But sometimes they're like, oh, I want to do that too. But it's like, this stuff takes a lot of effort and it's really hard. And a lot of times it's not always fun.
Right.
It's not easy. It's pain. There is a lot of pain involved in it.
Yeah.
Even though it's super rewarding. And so it's sort of like, unless you're sure that you love this, this is not kind of a casual career decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot about that conversation that I had with my art teacher. And I feel like he was telling me that, like, this is not a casual career decision. So if you want that, absolutely, he was very encouraging. He's like, if you want that, go for it. Absolutely. But he was warning me that the road would be hard. Mm-hmm. And that was absolutely true, you know? So, sure. I thought that was wise advice. It was just a little bit of a reality check.
Sure.
You know,
I talked to a student once, and she said to me, because she knew I had worked with Pixar, and she says, I want to work at Pixar. I'm like, okay. She goes, how do I do that? I'm like, well, what do you want to do at Pixar? And she goes, well, I don't know. It's like, well, they don't hire people just because they want to work there. You have to have something that you do. And that was a revelation. She just thought it would be fun to be there. It's like, yeah, it's fun to be there, but it is a place where people are working and they all have jobs to do and they all know what they are. There's not somebody just wandering around getting paid.
Right.
Anything they do. Like it was this interesting thing. I think sometimes maybe because it's animated and it's a fantasy environment on the other end, it's very, you go there and you get transported, but doing the work is just, it's work. There's no magic for the magician, right? You know what I mean? You see all the stuff behind the scenes. So it's a different thing. But people, the work is not, a reality to a lot of people who dream of this kind of work or this kind of a job. So
something you said to me once has stayed with me for a long time. Of like, I think you said, I think I was eavesdropping. You were having a conversation with somebody else, and you're like, "Well, do you know how to play checkers?" And the guy was like, "Well, yeah, of course I know how to play checkers." You're like, "Well, I don't," because I've spent all of my energy like trying to learn about and focus on this one thing. And that's sort of how I feel about animation. Is it takes kind of all of your energy, and so it's not for the faint of heart of like, oh yeah, like 9 to 5. Let me just,
right. Yeah. It's not that kind of work.
Yeah.
Right. And when you were talking about observation earlier, that observation thing doesn't go off, right? It's not just there when you're working. It's always there. It's there as a writer. It's there as an animator. Like, oh, look at the way that kid is moving. Look at the way, like you can't, you can't turn it off. Yeah. Even on particular scenes and assignments, there's the adage of like animators never finish their work. They just get it taken away. Like at some point we have to turn it in, but I would say 99.9% of animators, it's like, we're never ready for that moment. We're like, oh, it's not done yet. Like, it's not as good as it needs to be yet. There's always still things that we're seeing that are wrong, that need to be fixed and that could be better, or we're frustrated because we don't see it, but we know that we can see that it's not as good as it should be, Mm-hmm. So, that thing, it's like you go to sleep at night, even though you're done working, you're like, okay, how can I fix that pose? How can I? So I have a friend who's an illustrator. He's at Pixar now, but he's never satisfied with any drawing. He's always been one of the best illustrators that I've known, always. I remember when he was in art school, I remember everybody was just like, well, he's just great. It's like he's very good. He's never satisfied with anything he does. And I talked to him about it once, and he goes, well, that's because once I've drawn something, I know how to do it better. Right. So, and that never ends. And what I've seen with people who are good at what they do is that kind of is the case. They are always reaching to be better. That's part of what makes them good. And so once they do something, they've gone through the process, and it's almost like a rehearsal for the next, like, now I can do it better, but that'll always be the case. And so you do have to take it away. And there is always a little bit of dissatisfaction, I think. Occasionally you'll go, I hit that one out of the park, but often it's the other way around. And you think, if I had a little bit more time. Do that forever. Yeah.
One of the things for me and I hate that this always happens, but the moment that I feel confident about like, okay, I've done my blocking on the scene, I think it's pretty good. Without fail. The moment I have that moment of pride, I show it in dailies, and it's like way off. And it has taught me that it's like, if I feel confident about something, I'm like, oh no, what's wrong? There's something wrong here. Because it's more often not the time that I'm really, sort of not worried about it, but it's like, there is a little bit of a fear of like, that maybe I can't do this.
Yeah.
And that fear drives me to do my best.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The other thing that you're talking about is something I tell people to do with screenplays, which I think I've talked about on the show. But so a lot of times they'll want me to read a screenplay. And I tell them first of all, I don't want to read a screenplay that is your first draft or whatever. I want you to get it bulletproof before you hand it to me. But here's the thing. I tell people, write it, get it as good as you can get it. Then print it out. Pick out the perfect color for the cover. Put that cover on it, bind it, then hand that script to someone you trust. And the second you hand it to them, you'll know everything that's wrong with it.
Yep.
Because all of a sudden you're looking through their eyes.
Yep.
Right? And so nobody has to say anything, right? In dailies, when you see it through other people's eyes, you say, oh, that's not right. That's not right. That's not right. They may also tell you, but you know already. Yeah,
it is that thing. It also happens we're all working from home right now, but when we are in the studio, we go to dailies and it's like a theater room. So we have a big screen and, I'm working on the little screen at my desk.
Right.
The moment you see your work, zoomed out to this like giant size, it amplifies all of the mistakes. And suddenly it's like, I see it for the first time. And I'm like, how did I not catch that before? And why have I publicly embarrassed myself now?
Yeah. But that's the thing about this kind of creative work is that it's a vulnerable place. People don't understand how vulnerable it is to create and present to the world. Here's my thing. It's a hard thing to do. I don't think people understand that part of it either. But that's where the glory is. When you slay that dragon and work through that and you can show your stuff when you work on something like Tangled and you're in the movie theater and these people don't know you and they don't know anything, they're just invested in the character and her struggle. You've put yourself out there so that they can have that experience.
Yeah.
You've been vulnerable so they can have that experience, whether or not they even know that you're there.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of goes back to me of just how I approach the scenes, like the acting, that's me. And so that's one of those things of like, you put yourself into these characters and on the screen and you're showing it to people for feedback, and you have to have a thick skin. You have to know that it's not a personal attack or whatever. But if they don't like something, there is a little bit of it. It's like, you feel like, but that was me.
Right.
And you don't like me kind of thing.
No, that's true.
But
that's how you know you're doing it right too.
Yeah.
Right. If it was separate from you, then there's something you're not putting in there. Right.
Yep.
So that sting is part of it is, you're sort of lucky you're not there with Milt Call because, apparently he didn't pull any punches in dailies.
Yeah. No, I got to say though, I appreciate the Milt Calls in my life because they're the people that, aren't going to sugarcoat it. They're not worried about your, the Milt Call was probably worried about somebody's feelings, but it's like, they're not worried about the personal injury that's going to occur. They're just objectively kind of looking at the work, giving what they think is wrong about it.
Yeah.
And the time that I have had blunt feedback, that has been the most clarity I've had. And it's also, you can kind of go two ways. You can be paralyzed by that and cry in a little ball and not be able to move past that. Or you can take that real advice and go, okay, now I need to fix this. I need to apply this to my work. And I often, when I get blunt feedback that is critical and maybe not what I wanted to hear, I often do my best work on the other side of that.
Yeah.
So, so I appreciate that too. You know, but it's hard. You're very much putting yourself out there, and I'm a people pleaser. And so that's real scary, you know?
Do you, when you hear feedback like that, or I shouldn't say the worst kind of feedback, but the feedback that hits the hardest for me is stuff that I sort of knew already, that I thought I could get away with. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just I haven't quite solved this problem, but I think it'll be okay. And then there's, what's this Blair? You know, what's this thing? It's like, oh man, now I have to do the work. And you can fix it. That's the interesting thing.
Yeah.
You do have it in you to fix it once somebody points it out. But it often seems impossible in the moment. Like, that's the best I can do. And then when they say, you got to fix that, you can fix it. It's interesting.
Yeah. And I think maybe why that feels the worst is because if you had an inkling that maybe that's not right, then, you know, like when it's called out, I certainly feel like, oh, I didn't do my best, because my best would have been like, I'm feeling like something's not right here, and going and investigating it instead of feeling like, okay, maybe it'll be fine, you know? So.
All right. We're moving back and forth in time. So I want to go back now to, you still aren't an animator. You still want to do that. We can go up to the University of Washington. We can go that far. Let's go there. That's where I'm at. So what happened then?
Well, can I back up and how I got there?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Because in that Art of Animation book by Bob Thomas that I was reading all the little blurbs about, you know, these legendary, you know, supervising animators, one of the key components of all of that was like, they all went to CalArts. And so I had in my mind, I'm going to go to CalArts because that's where the Disney animators go to school.
Yeah.
And so when the time came to apply to college, it was right around the time that CG had really sort of taken hold in the industry. Toy Story had come out, you know, not quite 10 years before, but maybe 6 years before that. And Pixar was, you know, I don't know, like Shrek had happened, and Monsters Inc. was coming out and things like that. And it just seemed like the industry was really kind of going the way of CG. And I didn't have any connections to people in the industry, except my dad. My dad is an electrical engineer. My mom is a chemist. And so I have like two very like math, science minded parents. And then here I am like, I want to be an artist. And they were always very supportive, but it was like this world of art and art school and things like, it was just.
Let me just say this. I've talked to your dad. He could not be more supportive and more cool. I always like getting a message from your dad, and he's a very cool dude. So anyway.
Well, he's a fan as well. So, they were always never batted an eye of like, oh, you're going to take this art career. But it was just, we didn't know anything about the industry, you know, or how you got into it or what to do, a portfolio, you know, like it was just a foreign thing. And so my dad worked with somebody whose nephew, as it always goes, whose nephew worked at Disney. And he was not an animator, but he's a camera guy. So he worked in layout and kind of did, you know, like the cinematography stuff. And so got his email and emailed him of like, hey, I want to be an animator. Can you like give me some advice of where I should go to school and things like that? I'd like to be where you're at, you know, at Disney. And he was very nice. And he sent me back this email and he said, that's great. You know, CalArts is a good school, but if I can give you any advice looking into the future, you should really learn CG and the computer. And so I was like, oh, okay, I need to learn the computer. And at that time, CalArts didn't have a CG program. It was all kind of traditional at that point. I visited CalArts, loved it, still love it, still wish I could go there. Yeah. But I thought, well, you know what? My ultimate goal is I want to work at Disney. So I need to make sure that every choice that I'm making is maximizing that possibility. Mm-hmm. So much so that I even, I took French as my language in high school and was a French major for a while in college, because Disney had 3 animation studios: Burbank, Orlando, and Paris. Yeah. And I thought, well, if I need to go to Paris, I need to speak French. So I'm going to learn French. So I made my language choice based off of wanting to work at Disney. Sure. So I had, when I got the advice to learn the computer, which was very wise advice, I went on the internet, which was still kind of dial up at that point and very slow to do research on. Yeah. And Pixar at the time had a list of recommended schools, which, I didn't find on like a Disney website or anything, but Pixar had it. And they had 2 lists of schools separated into artistic and technical. And the University of Washington was at the top of the technical list. And I thought, okay, so the University of Washington's got good computer stuff. It's also a full-fledged university. I can take art there. So I can maybe double major. I can do both tracks there. And it was in state. And so just, practically speaking, it was cheaper, and, it was the wiser decision for me at the time. And so I ended up choosing the University of Washington with the goal of learning the computer and doing art. Mm-hmm. So, and kind of trying to make my own major. So that's how you got there. And yeah. So I met you when you were taking what do they call that program? The summer story class. I don't know. It was during the summer, right?
I met you during the summer. Okay.
I think so. It was like intro to storyboarding, or it was basically, you were teaching the story before the capstone.
Right. Right. So I would teach. So the way it worked is I would teach story in the summer. Some of those students would actually be part of the capstone. And then during that, I would be sort of the story consultant all the way through the films that you were producing or making then. And so I couldn't remember exactly if you were a summer student or not.
Well, I know I took your class before I was supposed to. Okay. So for those that don't know, at the University of Washington, I ended up majoring in computer science, which was a whole lot more technical than I think. I mean, my dad knew, I knew, but like, I didn't realize maybe I didn't need to go as technical. But the computer science department had, at the senior level, they had this year-long animation capstone. And it was a series of classes where you got to learn CG animation, make a short film, and it had your class listed as intro to storyboarding and story. And I was like, oh, this is all the stuff I want. And so, but you had to be I thought at the time that you had to be a computer science major to be in it. Mm-hmm. And but it was only available for kind of, I think, like junior, senior level people. But I remember your class was open, like they were allowing people that weren't necessarily going to go into the capstone to take it. And I remember talking to Barbara, who was the kind of the professor over this whole thing, and saying, hey, I do want to take the capstone, but can I take this class now? And I took it and I loved it so much. I ended up taking it like 3 or 4 more times.
You took it a lot. Yeah.
And then I think I TA'd for the class as well, so that I could just sit. I mean, it was.
No, it was good. It was good to have you around. So you were around a lot, and it was weird when you left because, like, it was Kira. She's supposed to be here, like you were, because it was a while. I don't know how long, but yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I stayed even after I graduated for a while. So yeah.
So it was what, like 4 years maybe, or
something like that. I mean. Yeah, since at least like 2006, probably. Yeah. So three years.
Yeah. So, well, I'm glad you like it so much to take it that many times. But I hope it helped to get it into your bones. That's what I'm always trying to get. Trying to get people to the point where it's not as intellectual as it first starts. You know what I mean? That it becomes part of just how you process.
Yep.
And you can diagnose problems, and you have the vocabulary and the framework to diagnose problems, but you can feel it and understand what you're feeling. Like, that doesn't work. I think it's a first act problem. If we did this and this and this, right?
I know. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Did that?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like, especially coming, even though I said I wanted to be an artist, like I still did a very kind of analytical major. But the thing that I loved kind of about math was that, okay, well, here's your equation. If you show your work, you can get to the answer. And there's like a right and a wrong answer. And I felt like you broke down story. You made story objective instead of this subjective thing for me that I couldn't be creative enough to like even approach or try to understand. Because I remember that very first class, because I called my parents afterwards and I was like, I just took the most amazing class ever. I'm so excited to be here. Because I got to say, I was a little bit I wasn't depressed, but I was feeling kind of the struggle of, how am I ever going to get to my dream? Because I was taking programming and algorithms and doing all these things that didn't feel like it was getting me closer to Disney. And they were hard. Yeah, but sure. I remember taking your class, and one of the first things you talked through were the 7 steps. One step at a time, and every day, and because of this, until finally, and ever since that day. And it was like, oh, there's a structure here. And it's like, okay. And then you talked about armature, and you talked about, like the premise, and the whole story became a proof, almost like a mathematical proof of like, here's your premise, here's your argument. Now this is your conclusion. Yeah. And it was like, oh, I get it. I can wrap my mind around this, because even if I don't have the best premise ever, I can figure out what the pieces need to be for this thing to make it work. And maybe I need to, be creative and think of a good armature or think of these good things. But it felt like you made it within my reach to analyze and to improve upon. And so it gave me, it solidified it of like, I can get better at this. I'm not great, but I can get better.
Oh, good.
So yeah. Anyway.
Oh, that's good. Good. That's exactly what I would want to be able to do for somebody, to make them say, oh, this is accessible. I can do this. And it gives you the tools again to diagnose problems, to see where problems might be, not just in your work, but in other work. And it's funny because I often call it story math.
Yeah.
Yeah. I often call it like I've talked about it with the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the ending is wrong. And I loved the movie when I was a kid, when it came out. But I read the script a lot. I bought the script. I read it a lot. I was way into it. And then one day I was like, this ending is not right. And later, Steven Spielberg also said the ending wasn't right. But what was interesting, so at the end of that movie, this guy who's obsessed with spaceships, these UFOs, gets on a UFO and goes away, but he has a family and kids and a wife and stuff. And it's sort of treated as this happy ending, but I was like, but he just left his family to go into space for who knows how long. And because there's also these other characters that have been gone for decades who are getting off the ship as he's getting on. And Spielberg said, well, at the time I wrote that movie, I didn't have kids. And so I wouldn't have written it that way now because I have kids, and I realize he's leaving his kids behind. And I don't have kids, but when I watched it, the story math is off. It's like, well, you can't make it a happy ending if a guy leaves his wife and kids. It doesn't work. The math doesn't add up.
Yeah.
I always think if you took out the UFO thing and you made it something else, you took out the UFO thing and you made his thing an addiction to drugs or to gambling or something, and at the end he chose that over his family, it would be clear to everybody that it was the wrong decision.
Yeah.
But because of nice, sparkly, shiny UFOs, everybody thought it was cool. But anyway, but I often refer to it as story math. So it's interesting that you equated it with math.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just accessible is exactly the right way to think about it, because it just felt so inaccessible to me before. And I was like, oh, okay, I feel like maybe I can understand this. I'm probably not going to become a screenwriter, but I felt like, oh, I can apply this to the characters that I'm animating. How are they acting? Why are they, doing these gestures? Or, I feel like I can take that and abstract it to what I'm doing as an animator, because ultimately I'm a piece of telling the story. I'm a storyteller in my role here. So, so that was eye-opening and so helpful. Oh,
good. So you left. So when you graduated and stopped TAing, for me, you then went to California. Am I correct?
I did. While I was finishing up TAing at UW, there was this brand new, new concept of Animation Mentor, which was an online animation school. And it was started by, 2 animators at Pixar and 1 at ILM. And they were going to teach you over webcams how to animate. And it was one of these things where it was like, this sounds great, but I don't know. I just went to a major university. I have a BS in computer science. It was just the concept of going to school online was not a big thing at that point.
Yeah.
But I was like, you know what? The thing that I was really missing was I don't know any professional animators.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anybody who is operating at the level that I want to be, who can look at my work and tell me how far away I am and what I need to do to get where they're at.
I just want to say this about knowing professional animators, because you and I, when you were a student, would geek out over Glenn Keane.
Yeah.
We bonded over our admiration for Glenn Keane. But we both know now. So,
It's crazy world.
I know. But we spent a lot of time geeking out about Glenn Keane specifically. I remember.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that was so striking to me when I met, not only that first class blew my mind, but I remember talking to you after the class. And I remember saying, I'm here because I want to be an animator and I want to work for Disney. And you immediately were talking about the 9 Old Men and Glenn Keane. And I was like, nobody else knows these guys around here. Barbara did, but nobody else, none of my peers, nobody else kind of knew who these people were. And I was like, wait, you know these guys? Let's talk about them. Because I had immediately found a friend in that, you're not just a story guy, you know about this stuff. And I felt like, oh, thank you. That was so helpful to know somebody that had a background in the things that I was interested in and could sort of help guide me and oh yeah, well, did you know this about Frank? Did you know this about Glenn? And analyze their work together. And so, that was very exciting.
It was exciting for me too. Because again, the students didn't know that stuff either. Right. So it was just, somebody who cares about this stuff and knows, wants to know about Frank Thomas or whatever, who's always been my personal favorite animator. But there's something about Frank Thomas's work that speaks to me like nobody else's.
Yeah. And I love them all for different reasons. Mark Davis was always a big one for me.
Mark Davis is serious. Yeah.
Yeah. And he, Sleeping Beauty was the movie that really solidified me into wanting to be an animator, and the idea that he designed not only Aurora, but also Maleficent and animated them. And then I love Disneyland, and he did all that work for the parks. And
yeah, sure. I could see that. You know what it is? I had the Illusion of Life early when it first came out.
Yeah.
And I would look at all of the, they had these drawings. They would have a Freddie Moore thing and you'd see all his drawings, and, and I remember every time I looked at Frank Oz's stuff, it was each one of his drawings was alive.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel that with other people. I felt like, oh, this is nice. It's nicely drawn. It's whatever. But I felt like Frank Thomas. I was like, each one of these drawings is actually alive. It's really, yeah.
The other thing that I love about Frank is that, if you can find images of the actual drawings, or if you have the privilege of going to a museum and seeing the real drawings, or the Animation Research Library at Disney, if you can somehow get a tour, and if you can see the real drawings that he did, he's so good. He is so good. But what I love about those drawings is you can see the struggle on the page.
You can see it.
Like, it wasn't like he just drew it and he was like this magician computer that like outputted the perfect drawing.
Right.
Like, you see kind of the erasure marks and like how he had drawn the arm here, but now he's drawing it here because the line of action is stronger through that. And it was like he worked at it. And, all those guys worked at it. I mean, even Milt Kahl, if you look at Milt Kahl's thumbnails that he does before he started his scenes, he like, there's one in particular for like Robin Hood, and it's like he tried every single pose option that you could imagine before he figured out where he was going to go with it.
Sure, yeah.
But I love Frank's because he does have such a real kind of emotion in his work, but you can see it on the page too, that it was a struggle. And it gives me a little bit of kinship of like, I think animation is really hard. And, I feel like it is a struggle for me. And the idea that one of the 9 old men maybe struggled a little bit too through some of that stuff is great. Cause I look at like Milt Kahl's drawings and Mark Davis's drawings, and I'm like, they just look perfect. How do they do that? So.
But the thing about looking perfect, there's a scene in, I think I've talked about this on the show too, but there's a scene in the movie Summer Stock with Gene Kelly, where he dances on a piece of newspaper.
Yeah.
And Gene Kelly had a way of making everything look like he could just do it. But he worked and worked and worked on that newspaper thing forever to make it look like he's not working,
Yeah.
And that's often the case, that when it looks effortless, what that really is so much work that it looks effortless.
And I'm also a huge fan of Gene Kelly, but Gene always talked about every dance that he created, every move that he did had to have a raison d'etre. So it had to have a reason for being. And so, I look at his work and it's like, I can see kind of the armature in his work, and he had reasons and choices for why he was doing the things that he was doing. But yeah, the simple stuff is always the hardest.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'm getting to work with Byron Howard, who was one of the directors on Tangled. He's an amazing animator, hand-drawn animator. And but I've worked with him on several films now, and he is somebody that often wants less. Mm-hmm. It's like, we're animators, and so we think, oh, we got to make the characters move. That's what I do. But a lot of times it's like, no, the scene only needs to be one pose.
Yeah.
That is so hard. It is so hard to just do a one pose scene.
Yes.
And people think that, no, I'm not doing my job. I'm not making it move enough, but sometimes nothing is the hardest thing to do.
It is the hardest thing to do. There is a term, from what I understand, and I don't know it. But I think in Japanese, that basically is the art of not doing, the art of doing nothing, which we don't have in English. We don't think of those things that way. But there's often in writing, in acting, in all these things where I'm like, you don't need to do all that stuff. The less you do, the better this is going to be. And it's funny, when your job is to do something, you think you have to do it all the time, right? Yeah. It's like, no, don't do that right now. Well, what? But it's only the people at the top who know that, at least in this culture.
Yeah.
Oh, don't do that. Don't do anything. I remember there was an interview with Paul Newman, who was an actor who some people have forgotten. People don't know Paul Newman anymore, which makes me sad. But Paul Newman used to say if he didn't like watching his old movies because he saw himself working so hard. because I see myself working too hard. It's not that hard, it's like, but after years, the decades of doing it, he got to the point where it was like, oh, I don't do anything and that works better, but it takes a long time to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, but
no, in fact, my very first mentor that I had when I got to Disney, his name is Eric Walls, and he's both a 2D and a CG animator. And I would start a scene and he would say, okay, you can only have 3 golden poses. And it was sort of, I was like, only 3? Like, I need a little more to show my intention. And he was like, well, do the 3, then we'll look at it, And so it was like, okay, I had to break it down into a beginning, middle, and an end.
Yeah.
And I had to really craft those poses and figure out okay, how can I communicate what I want to communicate in only those 3? And then I would show it to him and he'd be like, okay, great. We would work on those poses, and then, then he would sort of approve that and okay, now you can break it down and work into the movement between the 3.
Yeah.
But it was so he was a great teacher, but it was so frustrating and so hard to only do 3.
Yeah. It's funny. I've been asked, the story spine, the 7-step, Once Upon a Time in Every Day, that the story spine, the way that I teach it, it's 7 steps. A lot of people teach it that way. I'm not the only person who teaches it that way. But there are a lot of times people say, well, you can add more steps. You should be able to add more steps. And there are people that why are you so strict about just 7, And it's because it forces you to be more precise.
Yep.
The hardest thing for people to learn is to condense and to be precise, which is the way that I've started thinking about simplicity. Simplicity is not about simplicity. Simplicity is about precision.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's this and only this. This is the perfect thing. This is the right thing. It forces you to eliminate everything that's not necessary.
Yeah.
And communicate more clearly. So it's all about precision. So I'm like, no, you only get 7. It's like, but I want to add stuff. It's like, you only get 7. You can do it. And it's really hard. It's a hard thing to learn.
Yeah.
People almost feel like you're torturing them when you make them do things simple.
Yeah, it's always why I loved how you described, theme or the armature as, you have an armature in the sculpture and everything has to hang off of that. And anything that isn't being supported by that armature, it's gonna fall off, not gonna work. And I think sometimes, it can be frustrating to work through those things, but also some of those constraints give you better answers in the end.
Yeah.
I mean, even something, physical, technology constraints. I think about, I remember hearing a talk for, one of the visual effects supervisors for some of the original Star Wars movies. And they were talking about kind of I think it was a green screen process or whatever of when they were doing the ships, they couldn't have reflective material on the ships.
Right.
Because it wouldn't work. Right. And so they had to make the ships matte. And so then they thought, okay, well, we'll kind of beat them up and I don't know, put dirt on them and things like that. And I was like, but that added to the authenticity of it. It looked like those ships had been through space.
Right.
They weren't off of the showroom floor. They were, it was a better, more precise answer that they found because of that constraint.
Yeah, that's usually what happens. The constraints are really helpful. And if you don't have them, it helps to create them.
Yeah.
If you don't have them, if you can do anything, the problem with being able to do anything is that's an infinite number of possibilities, right? You need to get it to a finite number of possibilities, right? So you can make decisions about what to keep and what to throw out. And being precise is all about that. It's all about knowing what to keep and what to throw out. And what's funny to me too is that I think that when people intellectualize this, and this may sound like we're intellectualizing it, but it's really a way to get past the intellectual in a weird way. But there are people who want to be smart and they want to be seen as smart. And so they tend to want to complicate things because I think they want to be seen. And so they will dismiss simplicity, and throw in more complication, throw in more, it's going to be hard to understand. It's going to be hard, and that always puts people in their heads and gets them out of their gut, out of their heart to experience the emotion of what you're doing. But I do find that the restraints, they end up helping you in ways that you couldn't predict, and that it makes you solve the hard problems. And when you solve the hard problems, it's funny, when you really solve a really hard problem, it looks inevitable. I remember there was an interview with John Williams, and he was talking about, or it was in a book or something, and he was talking about like the Raiders of the Lost Ark theme or something. And he says, it's really hard, and it takes a long time to come up with the right notes to make it feel inevitable.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. But that's what he's doing. He's working very hard. He's throwing out a ton of stuff. And I don't know what he uses as an armature or a guide when he's doing Raiders, Star Wars, or Jaws or whatever. I do know a little bit about what he thought of with Jaws, which is interesting, because he was like, well, it's sort of this, what did he say? How did he say it? Basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he was like, well, it's this killing machine. So it's just always, it's moving along, and it's this kind of dun, 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 and you can speed it up. Dun, 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 dun. It's 2 notes. Dun, 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 dun. It's 2 notes. Talk about precision. 2 notes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Spielberg laughed when he heard it the first time. He goes, John Williams is like, this is what I'm thinking. He's like, really? That's what you're thinking? Well, hear me out. And he played it for him, and eventually, Spielberg's like, that's great, but it's so simple.
Yeah.
But it couldn't be more effective. The Jaws music could not be more effective.
Yeah. Well, I've heard you tell a story about, is it Somewhere Over the Rainbow, or a famous song like that, where it's like, can you play it with one finger?
Yep. Yeah. It's Over the Rainbow. Yeah. If you play it with one finger, right? That's getting it down to its most simple, precise form. You can build on that. Yeah. But you have to be able to get it down to that. And if you can do that, it's amazing what happens. In fact, speaking of like not doing much, there are times when you watch a Chuck Jones thing where the gag isn't the gag is a raised eyebrow by Bugs Bunny. Yep. Right? The gag is just pupils shrinking or growing. Yep. Right. That's the gag. And it's the most hilarious thing, no matter what the chaos, no matter what the thing is, that simple thing. It's a little movement here, or a little twitch, or it's amazing how precise he could be. Yeah.
It's amazing, especially in the Chuck Jones ones, how little he does and how funny they are, because it's like, I think in general, like, I think the world just thinks of Warner Brothers as like, oh, it's real cartoony and zippy and things like that. But if you watch some of those Chuck Jones things, it's just a pose. It's like one pose. There's so much restraint within that. I mean, the pose may be pushed. The comedy is certainly pushed to the max, but it's only a pose. And that is what is entertaining and funny. And you don't need anything else.
Right. Yeah. He was very good at going, this is all we need. He's very good at it. Yeah. But it doesn't look like anything. It doesn't look like anything was done. But that's often the very best work. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it is one of those things where I know like a lot of, movie makers and magicians and, people like that, they say like, my job is for you not to know that I'm here. It's like, when you see a scene that I've animated, I don't want you to feel like, oh, I'm seeing the hand of the animator, like, moving that puppet around or drawing that character. It's like, you want to just fade into the background and make it look like that's that character. It's easy. It's how it was always meant to be. And that there's not this work person behind the scenes doing all.
I mean, one of the cool things about being in this business at all is the people that you get to meet, because a lot of times you get to meet people who you grew up admiring, and you get to hang out with them and be their friend or work with them. And sometimes it's a little mind blowing. And I feel that way about Glenn, and I feel that way about Frank Oz. And, it's like, I know Frank Oz now. Like, it's a weird feeling. He couldn't be a nicer, more down to earth human being. I really like him as a person. And part of me is like, okay, I'm talking to Frank Oz, the person. And part of me is I'm talking to Frank Oz, the guy who practically taught me how to read because of Sesame Street, right? Like, it's like, there's two things. But one of the things about Frank is he's exactly the invisible, but like the fact that there's a person working Cookie Monster doesn't make sense in my brain still.
Right.
And that it's Frank. You know what I mean? Or Grover, or Miss Piggy, or Yoda, or all those things he does. Like, he does them. Like, he hasn't done them for a while, but that's him, but it's not him. And it's hard for me to imagine that it is him. Like, they're alive, those characters. It's an amazing thing, but he makes it look easy.
Yeah.
Well, he doesn't make it look easy. He doesn't make it look like work at all. He does make it look like he's not even there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a fascinating skill.
I know. And a hard one, and a really hard one.
Yeah. So, okay. So, we've gotten you to California. Right.
Oh, right. I was talking about Animation Mentor. Mm-hmm. So while I was still in Washington, I signed up with a couple other guys from the capstone class, who you'll remember, Ryan Sluman and David Lewis. The three of us together decided to sign up for this new thing, Animation Mentor. And it was, we would be individually sort of mentored by animators working in the major studios. So I was like, great, I'm finally going to have a professional animator working at the feature level look at my work and help me and critique it. And it was an 18-month program, and I had great mentors through there. It was like all of the things, in my college career, doing computer science and doing French and trying to do art on the side. There were a lot of things, and I was trying to smush all of those things into this avenue to get me to Disney. And it was like, when I got to Animation Mentor, I finally felt like, okay, I am focusing on actual animation right now.
Sure. Yeah.
And that was a great feeling, and getting feedback from those people. So there were 6 classes in Animation Mentor, and the 5th class, you storyboard like a short that you're going to animate in your 6th class. And my mentor during that time was Dean Wellens, who is, if you've watched the commentary on Iron Giant, you will know that Dean not only storyboarded half of that movie, but he animated a lot of stuff. He's amazing. He's a director at Disney now. So I had like top-notch quality mentors at Animation Mentor. I decided that, well, I'm getting to the end of my Animation Mentor time. I'm going to have a reel of work that I've done during this class. So I'm going to have to get a job after this. That was getting really scary, because this was like, am I going to get my dream or am I not?
Right.
And I decided I need to move to California, so that if any of these places offer me a job, I'm there and ready to go. And my best friend was actually living down in Southern California at the time, and her roommate was getting married. So I was like, great, I'll move in with you. And so I moved to California, and I finished up Animation Mentor there. And so I was one step closer to trying to fulfill my dream there.
So you started getting work, right? I remember trying to remember what you were first working on. First thing I remember is Vault. Did you do something before that?
Yeah, I did. So with Animation Mentor, I sent out my student, like the work that I had done at that program. I made a demo reel, and I sent it out to Disney. I sent it out to Rhythm and Hues and a bunch of other places. Rhythm and Hues called me, and they said, we have an apprenticeship program, and it would be a month program where you kind of just train on our system, and then you will probably roll into being like a junior animator on Alvin and the Chipmunks.
Okay. Oh, I remember.
So, yeah. So my very first gig was working on the CG, to clarify, the CG movie version of Alvin and the Chipmunks. And so I got to work on that for 5 months. And then after I finished that, Disney actually called me because I had sent out my reel, like, probably 6-8 months before then. And they called me and they said, hey, we're just getting started about doing a new trainee program. We haven't done one since the 70s. Yeah. And we'd like you to come. And I was just like, I was shaking. I couldn't believe it. Because it was like my dream was happening. And I remember trying, I had just gotten a phone call. That's all I got. And I hung up and I was like, wait, I have no proof. Like I have nothing to say like that I got a call. I have nothing,
right, yeah.
And it was a long while before I heard from them again. And then I would try to call the number and I'd always get the voicemail. And one time I called the lady who I love, but I called her and I was like, yeah, you called me and I just wanted to know when I might hear back. And she like misheard my name. And so she thought I was just like another candidate calling that she had called and she was going to hang up on me. And I was like, no, don't hang up on me. I got an offer from you guys, but I haven't gotten a letter or anything. Yeah. So anyway, it was so surreal, but the timing was great because who knew that they would start. I graduated in 2005 from UW, and doing Animation Mentor sort of bridged me to a time where not only was Rhythm and Hues doing an apprenticeship program, but Disney was looking to do a trainee program. And it's like, I'm so kind of amazed at how that timing worked out so perfectly. Yeah, no kidding. So I got to go to Disney. And my first film there was Bolt. And I was just like a fix animator, so I did little things here and there. And then they kept me on after that. So I became, my first credit as a full-fledged animator was Tangled. So. Okay.
Since you've been a full-fledged animator, what about the job is different than you thought it might be? And well, let's start there. So what about the job is different than you thought it might be when it's a fantasy versus the reality of the job?
That's an interesting question. And I don't mean to sound like fake about this. I mean this with all sincerity. It has fulfilled every fantasy that I have had, but it's even better. I remember walking into the building and I saw Eric Goldberg and I saw, I was like, that guy's the genie. Like I was walking in the halls with the people that had really shaped my childhood, I mean, the 9 old men weren't there anymore, but it was like the renaissance of, Glenn Keane and The Little Mermaid and all of those films that had captured me at the right time to really lock me into the Disney track. It was like, I get to work with them in person and learn from them. Like that was so incredible. And I think, I was very, this happened in school, but I was very relieved that I got to focus on the acting. Mm-hmm. And I got to sort of be these characters and that we really, we took improv classes and we took drawing classes, but we were really sort of focused on becoming actors. And it felt like it was kind of the film school that I was never brave enough to go attend because I didn't want to be an actor myself, but I do get to do that now. And so that was great. But the idea that I could be there in person with a whole building full of people that were so much more talented than me and at a higher level than me, and that they were helping me, that's still mind blowing to me every single day. Like this past, year or so, I haven't been able to walk into the building, but when I do, like, I literally still pinch myself. I still get goosebumps when I like see the little hat above the entrance and I walk in there. So yeah, it is absolutely everything I imagined and more. So
it is like that to be there. I mean, I've only worked there as a lecturer and when I worked with Keane on his movie for a little while, which was great because we were in Frank and Ollie's really their old sort of space, which was just to be in that space, just to be in D Wing. If anybody's an animation geek, was insane just to be there. And Glenn knows all the history of everything, so he would point to everything. Like, this is where Milt Call's office was, and this is this, and this is that, and it does feel like you're walking around in a dream, sort of.
Yeah.
It's an interesting feeling. My favorite thing that happened to me when I was at Disney working with Glenn, I don't know if I told this on the show or not, but I was we were working together on his movie. I'm half doing my job, being a pro, and half freaking out that I'm working with Glenn Keane on his movie, right? Both those things are happening at the same time. We go out to get a cup of coffee or something just to take a walk. And so we step out and there's a young animator and his friend. And this guy wanted to introduce his friend to Glenn, and Glenn is, so he comes up and he's like, Glenn, hey, I want you to meet my friend. And Glenn's like, well, we're kind of working right now. We're kind of busy, and very polite. You know how Glenn is, but yep. Like, we're working. And he goes, well, just real quick, I want you to meet so-and-so, so-and-so. And so they meet. And then Glenn says, oh, by the way, this is Brian McDonald. Now, I'm freaking out that I'm working with Glenn. And this guy looks at me and he says, you're Brian McDonald? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, dude, I love your book. And he went on. And I'm like, I'm standing next to Glenn Keane. I don't know if it was a weird feeling. It's like one of the freakiest things that happened to me. It happened to me with August Wilson one time too. Similar thing. Where I was with August and somebody recognized me and not August. And that never happened when I was with him. They're like, you're a filmmaker. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, dude, and I'm right next to August. But yeah, so it's weird when that happens too. And that's not why I'm in this, but it was freaking me out because I'm freaking out over Glenn. And then this guy's freaking out over me. And I'm like, oh, maybe I am part of this club. Maybe maybe I am one of these guys. It felt like I was invited to hang out, but not really part of the club. But then I felt like part of the club. Like, now I feel like part of the club, even though I don't work there very much. It's been a while since I've been back to Disney, Disney proper.
Yeah, you need to come back.
I'll come back. But it was fun. It was dreamlike. So I get what you're saying. Yeah. What kinds of things I heard you talk once after you'd been working there for a while, and you were saying things, and I'm like, oh, those are things, of course, she's learned since I was around her a lot. So what kinds of things have you learned about your job? Like, when you are animating, now you've animated, the character, you're the character that I hear about when I'm talking about you with somebody, I always mention Judy Hopps from Zootopia. And people freak out. Like, people love Judy Hopps, right? Do people recognize you and Judy Hopps? And is there something that what is it that you could bring to that character, for instance, when you did her versus when you first started, like when you were working on another thing and you first started? Like, what have you learned that makes you better at your job than you were when you first started?
Oh, these are such hard questions. I mean, I feel like, the basics never get old.
Yes.
The basics are sort of always the things that I'm forgetting and needing to remind myself and learn again. So I don't know that there have been like huge revelations of like, oh, this was some big secret that was held on until I got inside the Disney walls. But I mean, I would say with Judy, it sort of solidified all of those things that had kind of been hinting at before, of like, I really need to find that personal connection for me in order to make this character believable. And the thing about Judy that was so strange, actually, was that initially when we started the movie, she was not the main character. Nick the fox was the main character. And then they cast Jennifer Goodwin to do the voice. And, you know, she has a very like kind of sweet voice, but she was coming in and she was, Judy was like a very seasoned cop. She'd kind of been there, done that. She was, you know, knew it all. Like it was just kind of old hat for her. And so Jennifer was doing kind of a relaxed kind of almost like a Southern accent kind of thing. And as the story was taking shape, I know that you say a lot, like, you know, you're a servant to the story. Like the story kind of tells you what it needs to be. And the story was shifting, and they were sort of discovering that, like, actually this needs to be Judy's story. Mm-hmm. And her character, like her personality, this is not who she is. And she suddenly became this optimistic dreamer, you know, like kind of a glass half full kind of bunny. And it was like, she was looking at the ZPD and becoming a police officer like no other rabbit had ever done that before. That was her dream. And it didn't faze her that no other rabbit had ever done that before, or that was a real big ask for just this tiny little bunny, when the other officers were these rhinos and tigers and, you know, things like that. But I obviously connected to that just from dreaming to be at Disney.
Yeah.
You know, and so during the production, everybody was joking, like even one of the sweaters that she wears, I had a sweater like that. So I was just walking around. I was walking around work, and they're like, she's just kind of turning into you in some ways, you know?
Mm-hmm. I could totally see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a real strong connection to where I felt like that character was coming from. And so that really became clear to me, I think, on that picture, that, oh, I need to do this all the time, because this is what does it. And that was an interesting experience, because I was supervising for the first time. So even when I wasn't animating the scenes, I was sort of giving notes on other people's scenes, and, you know, not only encouraging them to find that authentic part of themselves to bring to it, but, you know, trying to find that through line so that you would believe this is all done. This is a real living character. It's not done by 90 people.
Right.
You know, I didn't animate Judy all the way through the movie. You know, I did a small part of that. Right. But we have 80, 90 animators on these films sometimes, and we all touch the main character. So, you know, I don't think that really answered your question, but
no, it sort of did. What I think that when people are first learning these kinds of crafts, it's often focused on the external for a long time. How do you move that? How does that look? How does that, right? Yeah. It's always the external. It's the thing I say about screenplays, where it's always about the dialogue, right? Like, it's good because the dialogue is what's on the surface. That's what people can see, if you know what I mean. But the structure of a scene, or where it falls in the storyline, can have just as much or more impact than the dialogue. In fact, sometimes people are talking too much in a movie. Again, you could not say anything, and maybe that would be more powerful. Right. But I never hear young screenwriters talk like that. They're all about dialogue. But they also don't go inside themselves very much. And that seems to be the thing that people get better at over time with these kinds of crafts. Better at going inside, better at looking inside, and trying to bring that out. Yeah. And then it's getting beyond the, and it sounds like that's what you're talking about. figuring out how to go in rather than think about the surface as much.
Right. And actually, something that you reminded me of when you were talking about kind of like how the scene fits into the storyline. One of the things that I actually do feel like dawned on me when I got to Disney was like looking at your scene in context, in continuity. Like, we're not animating individual scenes for our demo reels. Like, it's not, they're not standalone little shorts.
Right.
And so being able to watch the scene that you're animating in the entire sequence of scenes, you know, I make different choices of, you know what, I need to not gesture here because that gesture needs to happen 3 scenes down the way.
Right.
And I think in a school setting, you know, you might work on a film, you know, a student film, but it's shorter. But seeing that consistently over several films of how important the continuity is. I remember, again, I think Tangled was a huge lesson on just stripping out anything that you don't need, you know, and Glenn obviously was a huge proponent of that. So Byron Howard and Nathan Greno, everybody was just less is more, you know? And so that it was such a hard lesson, but such a great lesson. But that was one of those things where you would sit with your scene at your desk and you would think, I'm not even moving the characters. This is not going to communicate what they need. And you know, you show it in dailies and they approve it and you're like, okay, well, I guess they like it, you know, and but what I was not seeing was when I sat in the theater and I watched it all play together, I was like, oh, now I get it.
Yeah.
Because I had tunnel vision on just the thing that was on my desk.
Yeah. And
so now, and you know, it's another problem that I constantly have is like, you know, we animate about 5 feet a week, you know, which is crazy. It's very slow. It's very slow. When I tell people that, that's usually when you see whether or not they want to be an animator, because they're like, oh, that's it. But you know, I'm watching, you know, a couple seconds, 3 seconds loop over and over and over and over again. And that can be on my desk for a week or 2 weeks or, you know, whatever. And, you know, it's not until, you know, I get your eyes are not fresh anymore. You're not a good judge of the work that you've done because you've just seen it so much. You need to show other people to get feedback. And the same thing I found true with just like, I need to watch this not only in the sequence, but then in the movie and backing up and like just saving out a movie file and saying, I'm going to play this and watch the whole sequence and see what other people are doing and see how mine is fitting into that. Sometimes that gives me the fresh eyes that I needed to make a better choice.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. It's also, I think, well, it's what you were talking about earlier, right? It's being a servant of the story, right? The tunnel vision doesn't allow you to do that, right?
Right.
But when you're looking at everything, you're like, oh, wait. If I look at the whole story or the whole sequence or whatever, then I'm being a show off, maybe, right? I'm showing how great I am at this or how funny I can be or how whatever. And maybe that's not what this needs now because I've got to save that, like you said. And so that becomes, you're able to take a backseat to the story and you're okay doing that when you realize, well, that's my job, right?
Yeah.
But when you first get in, I think people think their job is to show off and show how good they are and show how much they're contributing. And it's exactly the wrong thing to do most of the time. Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing that really stood out to me was, I talk about Glenn a lot, but really admire that guy. And he's so great. But one of the things that he said to us on Tangled was, when you make a mistake, because you will make a mistake, just make sure you don't make it in the eyes because that's where everybody's looking.
Wow.
And that always stays with me. So I pay the most attention to the eyes. You know, like if the arc isn't perfect on the arm that's swinging down below, but if I get the eyes right, nobody's going to notice that.
It's a magician's trick too. One of the ways that a magician gets you to look where they want you to look is by looking them.
Huh.
Because we will look where they look.
Interesting.
So they don't have to do any crazy thing to misdirect you. They just go like this and you go, and then do whatever they have to do.
I didn't know that. That's funny.
Yeah.
And clever.
Yeah. It's an observation, right? Oh, people look where you look. I can exploit that. There's nothing unnatural. So when you look, you haven't done anything unnatural, right? And them looking, you haven't forced them to do anything, right?
Right.
Yeah. They can also direct your attention by saying, I'm going to make this cup float. Right. Now you'll look. But one of the ways they get you to look is just to look, because we just automatically will look at eyes.
Yeah. And it's funny because when I was an animation mentor, I had a mentor. His name was James Brown, not the singer. But
that would have been an interesting career for one guy.
It would have, yeah. But he gave me like some notes on polish that I had. It was like unlocking a new level of polish that I'd never considered before. And I had a scene where it was basically just the eyes looking around, but he was like, well, the eyes have a cornea bulge, and when the iris and the pupil move over, that's going to like cause the lid to change shape. So you want to, as the eyes are moving, you want to change the shape of the lids so that it's also supporting the direction that they're looking. And I remember thinking, it never even occurred to me to put that level of detail into stuff. And the moment that I did, I was like, it feels so much more alive, and it was really that lesson of the eyes. So I always spend the most time there, no matter what I'm doing. I want to get those eyes looking the best and the most, sort of believable that I can.
Sure. And the eyes are big at Disney. Yeah,
they are.
Ours are big. Yeah. They're almost like look at me, look at me.
Yeah. So definitely don't make a mistake there.
Yeah. Judy Hopps had pretty big eyes.
She did, and they were purple. So
were they purple? I don't remember.
Yeah.
Wow. Why were they purple?
You know what? Again, I'm the animator who moves the character. I don't decide, what she was going to look like or what color. She was actually more of a beige brown rabbit in the beginning, and then she turned gray. And I think it was just to complement kind of the gray fur or whatever. But I was like, oh, she's even looking like my cat. Like I had a gray and white cat, and then Judy. It was just. I felt like it was a meant to be pairing.
It does feel like that. If people know you and they see, like I felt that. I don't think what other people see. Like I couldn't guess which shots are yours, scenes are yours, but Judy does feel like you.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. Yeah, she's great. And then you did some things I want to talk to you a little bit about, like how you approach a character like that. You used animal traits, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was a really fun puzzle because it was like, okay, the research part of it is one of the most fun things I think that we get to do. And, so we had these anthropomorphic animals, but the whole concept of the world was that these animals had evolved to walk on 2 feet and wear clothes and talk and things like that. And so we really wanted them to feel as authentically those animals as possible while still acting anthropomorphic like humans, So the goal was not to create walk around characters where it felt like it was a human inside a rabbit suit or a fox inside of a human inside a fox suit. Yeah. And so it was trying to find, okay, where is that magic where you can pull the most recognizable and distinct traits from these animals and still include it on a bipedal anthropomorphic performance.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we went to animal sanctuaries, and we went to zoos, and then our head of animation actually got to go on a trip with the directors to Kenya, and they went on an amazing safari. See, our jobs are really cool sometimes.
Yeah, no kidding.
He went on this amazing safari, and he got to observe, I mean, not rabbits as much, but he got to observe a lot of the other animals that we see in the film out in the wild and in their natural habitat. And the thing that was interesting is the guy that led them on their safari, he actually came to the studio before to talk to us. And he had grown up in Kenya, and, the thing that was so striking about it is he talked about lions and zebras and all of these, like, in my mind, exotic animals as if they were cats and dogs. Like, he sees them every day kind of thing. Right. And it's like, he commented, he's like, oh, lions, they're so lazy. And I'm like, I would have never attributed lazy to a lion, but it was that he had just been there out observing them on a daily basis, not kind of in a zoo environment or he got to kind of see their real personalities. And so then he took this small group of our team out to experience that. And Renato, who was the head of animation on Zootopia, he came back and he was looking at, we were doing some cycles, so walk cycles. We were trying to find where is that line between human and animal. So we were doing a lot of tests and just trying to figure out the locomotion of these characters. He came back from his trip on Kenya and he looked at all of our stuff. And in a very nice way, he basically said, we're doing this all wrong. None of this feels like these animals. And so they had filmed a lot of video footage of, these like giraffes, like running through the field, but just out in the wild, like how they naturally acted. And so we analyzed all of that and it was really helpful to have Renato, have that firsthand experience to say, this is not only what we're seeing, but this is what it feels like.
Right.
And so again, we would, look at each animal and figure out, okay, like if you strip away all of these other things that make it an animal, what are the things that you need to leave in order for you still to read that character or that animal as that animal?
Sure.
And so for Judy, obviously she had huge ears. Rabbits have amazing hearing, but their hearing is better than their eyesight. So obviously their ear is going to turn often before any other part of their body moves, because that is what is, sensing the sound or the danger or whatever. And so a lot of times we work to like have the ears lead the action in the movement. A lot of it too was just, their noses twitch when they get stressed, or they're kind of a high alert situation. And so we would try to like add those things when she was getting panicked or there was a tense situation. We'd start that nose going a little faster. But even down to the posture, rabbits do go up on like their hind legs, but they aren't. If you look at a human standing upright, they're very stacked, like their chest cavity is stacked kind of above their hips, and it's a very vertical line. But when rabbits are up on their hind legs, there's kind of almost, we lovingly called it the squirrel back, because a lot of animals have it, but it's like their chest cavity is a little bit forward over their hips. And so there's a little bit of a diagonal there. So we really tried that even when Judy is upright and standing, that she is standing, like her posture is a little bit leaned forward so that it doesn't feel as human as it would if her hips are right underneath her. And then there were moments where, she is startled or very high stressed, and we'd be like, you know what, she's going to go down on all fours and scramble out of the way, because, her natural instincts are taking over in these moments.
Sure.
So that feels like maybe that's a natural thing for her to do. So it was trying to find those things that not only made sense for her character and thematically with the story, but also made her feel more like the animal that she was.
It's fascinating because I don't think that people watching, I think when the rabbit's acting like a rabbit without knowing that. You know what I mean? I think as an audience, you don't have to know those things about rabbits, but it feels right. And I don't know if people understand how much work goes into making those things feel right. And so I think that's, I think I've told this story a million times, but it fascinated me. One of the years in the animation capstone, the students were doing a film that took place in the woods. And, it's right by the Arboretum, the University of Washington. It's like the Arboretum's right there. I'm like, you should go into the Arboretum and hang out. And they were like, well, we went on the internet, looked at trees. I'm like, no, go. It's right there. Go to the Arboretum and hang out. And it was like they didn't understand there was a difference between seeing a picture of a tree and walking through the woods. Yeah. And the difference that could make.
Yeah.
It baffled me that they wouldn't just go, like, first of all, it's not a hardship to go hang out in the Arboretum. So I don't, like just go hang out. You're going to learn things just from observation that you're not going to learn looking at a picture or a few pictures, or guessing about.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I've heard you talk about this too, where when you are doing your research, like if you're doing a story that's set in like the 1940s, like surrounding yourself with things that were made there, like if you're watching movies that were made then or music that was made then, just kind of immersing yourself with that stuff, you glean things that you didn't even know you were looking for, kind of thing. And that's really the fun thing for me in research, because it's like I don't know what I'm looking for, but it's my time to observe as much as I can. And we're not always able to go and be in these places, but finding as much as you can to put yourself in those moments. Like if Renato hadn't gone to Africa, Zootopia would have been a very different movie, especially animation wise.
Sure.
That changed everything that we were doing. And so even though that sounds like a fun and extravagant trip, it was necessary and useful. I love that time. I wish we had more time. I could just live in the research phase.
No, the research is fun once you make friends with it. A lot of people think it gets in the way. They want to do the thing, but once you make friends with it, it's amazing. Especially what I call the soft research, which is when you don't know what you're looking for and you're just observing and you're just taking stuff in. That's really, there's hard research like, well, wait, how does a rabbit move? Like, what are they, what's their bone structure, right? But then just hanging out and watching rabbits and seeing what you see can be like, oh, look at that. I never noticed that before. Here's the thing. I want to talk to you more, but I think we there's only so much time. So, I couldn't be prouder of what you've been able to do. It's nice for me to have been a part of it, and to have helped you get there. This dream you had since you were a little girl, it's unbelievably rewarding to me. And I could not be prouder when I go to the movies and I see something that you did. And always happy to talk to you and see how your life is going and how your career is going. And my heart bursts with pride over the things that you've been able to do and the person you have become. So,
well, thank you, Brian. I mean, you are my favorite teacher, and I literally think about the stuff that you taught me every single day, and I'm super jealous that I don't get to TA that class every day, because I feel like I've been deprived for a long time. I'm so glad you're doing these podcasts and these videos, because I have them on while I'm working. I've sent them out to all the Disney animators. They're enjoying them as well. So thank you for doing all this.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot. I hope we talk soon. It's
Yeah.
too long since we've talked. So.
I know.
Every now and then we'll on the phone, but
Yeah.
yeah. Well, cool. Thanks for taking the time to do this.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye, Kira.
Bye.
Thanks for watching You Are a Storyteller, part of the Co-Loop Podcast Network. If you have any questions or if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, leave a comment below or email us at hello@beliefagency.com.